alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Come on, lunch wasn't that bad, guys. Okay, today's a very important topic and we have a very informative guest. Not everyone thinks of the legalities whenever they're thinking of fundraising, but it puts a stop to a lot of efforts. Now, this topic is very technical, so we're going to be talking in English. If you have any questions, if any of the terms are unclear, please ask a question when we open up for questions. If anything is still unclear, please grab us after this session. We'll be happy to explain anything in more detail. The other thing is, it's also a very individual topic. Every company is different. So if you want things that pertain to your situation, how you should be structured, be sure to grab the courage, think of a question as you're sitting down. So as soon as we open for questions, you're able to take care of that opportunity. Because as soon as the first two questions come up, all the hands go up. So first people who decide to take it forward will win the prize. So, in order to get started with the discussion, we have the illustrious Yusuf Hamad, who's going to give us a brief about his philosophy, about some of the war stories that he's seen, and how he can do better. So, could you give us a brief about yourself and about Biko Capital and your investment philosophy?
Sure, thank you. اعذرونا يا جماعة وقنا بنتكلم باللغة الإنجليزية عشان بعض المصطلحات اليوم تقنية شوية. So معاكم your brother Yusuf Hamad من Biko Capital. We're a venture capital fund based out of Dubai, focused on the GCC and the wider Middle East. We've invested in about 16 different companies. Our most successful investments are in Kareem and Property Finder. We've lost one, and so we're now in a portfolio of about 15 or so. Our first fund was about $50 million in multiple raises, and now we're raising our second fund, doing the same thing that we're doing. Our philosophy is, or our strategy in investing is, we focus on early stage, so seed A and B. We do tickets between $400,000 up to $5 million. We look for businesses that are in the tech space, that are scalable, defensible, have a huge market, and a strong team. But we also look for businesses that have local friction points, meaning that they have or solving issues that are focused on this region by having a leg online or a leg offline of some sort. So we wouldn't invest in the Facebook of the Middle East, but we definitely invest in the Uber of the Middle East, if that makes sense.
Okay. So you see a lot of interesting entrepreneurs, lots of opportunities over the years. What are some of the common mistakes that you see in first-time entrepreneurs as they're creating their first legal entities?
Sure, yeah, and if we go back to kind of looking at some of the two common kind of areas of issues that we have from a legal perspective, one, which is the simpler one, is probably the legal structure itself. So kind of setting up an entity where it's difficult for funds to invest in a sole proprietorship or an LLC or some of these entities that are difficult for financial investors to invest in. These are easy, they're solvable, you can definitely fix it once you enter. The second problem are related to kind of founder agreements, their relationship with each other and with the company. What happens if one of the founders leaves? What happened to the board if the founder's on the board and trying to exit? So these are kind of the founder agreements, founder company relationship are kind of the most commonly disregarded elements, because when companies are setting up in the beginning, the founders are basing their relationship on trust, they're basing their relationship on friendship, and never see the doomsday coming up.
Yeah, so we're all friends early on. But what are the long-term side effects? What happens? What damage do you get if you don't pay attention to these certain problems and issues?
I mean, we always joke around kind of amongst peers, and we say, we don't like companies that are single founder companies, but we always joke around and say every company ends up being a single founder company. A lot of companies and a lot of founders, although they are aligned from the beginning on their strategy and in their vision and their roles, however, over time that splits. And we've seen many cases where kind of there's changes and founders leave and founders come. So the worst case that in our experience that we've seen is when you have a founder that spends 6 months or a year into the business. 10 years down the line, you have a founder, the second founder is still in the business and been fighting every single day to grow it, and both founders have the exact same shareholding. So not having vesting schedules, not having kind of clawback agreements, not having kind of board exit mechanisms for founders, that's when you typically see problems. And that really scares off a lot of investors during the, down the line. If you're coming in and, you have a founder who's in the business that has 15% or 20%, and another founder has been sitting at home for 5 or 6 years and has the exact same amount, there's a misalignment of interest, disincentive to continue the business. So that's kind of the biggest issue that we see, is the company will start kind of looking unattractive.
I mean, are these what you would call irreversible? Are these company-killing problems, mistakes that spell doom when you see them, that you run the other way as soon as you start seeing those kinds of patterns?
So, yes and no. So if we've come into a business where the founders are still aligned, nobody's left, there's still room to clean it up, we're able to fix that. But if we're coming into a business in a Series B and there's already kind of 1 or 2 founders that have exited the space, the ability to retroactively go back to one of the founders that left and say, hey, listen, give us back some of the shares to give to the other to the other founders is a really difficult conversation. But that's something that's going to be extremely difficult to solve for. So it's irreversible in the early stages, but extremely difficult in the later stages.
I see. So in which legal jurisdictions does BICO invest?
So to date, we've been investing in BVI, British Virgin Islands. We are considering a couple of other jurisdictions. There is ADGM now in Abu Dhabi Global Markets. These are kind of but BVI to date. The main reason there is they have a few things that we like. So investors typically look for corporations to invest in. The main reason is the corporations allow the company and the board to be independent and act in independence from the shareholders, especially in areas of fundraising and adding new shareholders, rather than versus an LLC, where the LLC would kind of require or gives the shareholder the ability to veto some of these actions. Now, when we look at corporations in the BVI, they're easy to set up, they're cheap, and they're efficient. Adding to that, they have the classes of shares, so preferred versus common, which doesn't exist in LLCs in Saudi today. So common shares or preferred shares are where early stage investors look to kind of invest and own some of these shares to protect their rights in the long term.
Okay, I mean, those are the advantages of BVI, but what are some of the other things that prevent you from investing in KSA, for example?
So if we kind of looked at the same thing that we just said, the classes of shares is one. So with Saudi, the classes of shares are specific to corporations and joint stock companies, or joint stock companies to be more specific. Joint stock companies are not cheap to set up. And there are some cumbersome reporting requirements. If I remember correctly, you need to invite the Ministry of Commerce to attend your annual shareholder meetings or something of some sort. So it's not easy to set up, and it's not easy to kind of continue going. Versus the kind of the BVI corporations, where it costs about, if I remember the last time, it was about $2,000 annually. So it's very easy to set up. The second reason, which kind of maybe particular to Saudi in general, is the foreign ownership. So investors like us that have their legal entities set up in the Cayman, that's where our investors are preferred, we have difficulties accessing as a foreign investor into Saudi. There are some limitations. But more importantly, founders. So when you have non-Saudi founders, their ability to own stocks and shares in their company gets a bit complicated and a bit expensive in the early stages. Obviously, we can solve that as we grow the business. So,
yeah, I mean that's a huge challenge. I mean, even for us in KAUS, we've got mixed teams all around. Technology that's developed by this nationality, the team struggles, and we have to. I mean, as Nabil mentioned earlier, there's Sagia now doing a process for universities, for innovations, for patent-based things, but even that only applies in specific cases and takes a long time.
So that's actually time. So we've tried to go through SAGI and some of the هيئة المدن for a few of the exemptions that they had. It definitely took a lot of time, and we ended up kind of just going for a standard structure that we're used to. We know how to set up. It's about speed at the end of the day. When you're investing in seed and Series A, you look for speed.
Okay. So would you encourage all of the entrepreneurs sitting here in the audience to run out and create a BVI, or is this something they do day one? Is this something they contemplate, they prepare for? How do you prepare for that?
Don't set it up if you don't need it. If somebody doesn't ask for it, don't do it. At the early stages, like I said, it's about speed. So if it's you and your co-founder, it's your own money, you're setting up, go for an LLC or a sole proprietorship, set the company up and get going. Once you have investors that are coming in later, institutional investors that would like to institutionalize your structure, then go for it and let us pay for it. So don't worry about the cost. So wait until it's the right moment. But make sure that your agreements as founders between each other and between the company are solid. That's what you really need to focus on early on, and that's been, in our experience, that has been the biggest issue from a legal perspective in kind of dealing with some of these situations.
So how do they prepare? What should they do to make sure that flows as smoothly as possible?
It's a tough conversation. Your friends, your buddies, you were in university together, or you were working together and leaving to set up your own company. Having a conversation of what happens if you leave and I'm going to take some of your shares back, and what happens if you leave and I want you to exit the board. It's a tough conversation. Yeah. It starts there. You have to have that conversation in the beginning. Get a professional lawyer that can help you with facilitating that conversation and understanding what are the standard practices in the market, what happens, and what are the effects and the impacts in the long run. So just starting with that conversation and really setting up your structure between each other, the founders and the founder-company relationship is how you start. So speak to each other, get lawyers involved.
Okay. Now, we're short on time, so we want to make sure that we've budgeted enough time for audience questions. Any questions on regulations, on setting your company up, how to do it, where to do it? I have a ton of questions myself. We have one question in the front row.
خالد سليماني from Chrome Advisory. أخوي يوسف كيف حالك؟
يا حبيبي.
الرحمن. I just want you to elaborate on something that you mentioned, and I think it is the major hindrance for VCs operating in the kingdom. We've heard in the previous session people talking about we need more money, and from experience, and I think you agree that we don't really need more money as much as we need enablement in terms of regulations. So the VC operates, it cannot operate with the tools that Yusuf has mentioned. Having multiple classes of shares, being able to do a deferred valuation, separation of the administration from the shareholders. And my question I want Yusuf to elaborate on is that when you create the company in the BVI, how do you deal with the asset here in Saudi Arabia? Do you let them transfer everything to the BVI company? From experience, did you face any problems with the founders? From a regulatory perspective, this workaround, what also other problems does it present to you as an investor? Yeah, we have to mention it. Somebody has to listen.
So if we look at some of the experiences that we have. So the link between the BVI and the operating entity, we do whatever it takes, and whatever it takes. We'll find the best solution for that specific period of time, and then we'll continue improving it until we're fully legal. So agency agreements and whatnot, whatever it is, we'll take care of it. Now, with transferring the IP, actually we ensure that all of the IP is transferred to the holding company. The holding company is where the money sits, is where the shareholders sit. It's where you have the founders vesting. It's where you're able to raise capital and to sell some of your shares. A, B, we're looking at this as a regional play. When we invest in a company, any company we invest in, we look for them to be regional, and then very quickly we push them to be regional. So over 1 or 2 years, you're definitely going to see multiple operating entities: Saudi, Kuwait, Egypt, Emirates. that link back to one single entity. Now, unless you've transferred all of the IP upfront, everything, you've moved all of the assets to the BVI, you're going to have a hard time raising capital at BVI, and you're going to have a harder time getting follow-on capital from later stage investors. And it's just much simpler once you have everything at a single entity, where you have multiple operating entities on the ground. Now, the issues we face are typically with kind of when dealing with a lot of the different entities on the ground. So if you're a business that's going to have government contracts, or if you're a business that's going to deal with وزارة العمل ووزارة التجارة and any of the ministries, that's when you're going to start having some issues. You're going to have proper contracts and service contracts between the BVI and the local entities. And it's typically easy to put together, but a lot of people don't think about it. So this is where we kind of spend time forcing them to kind of put these agreements in place, make sure that the ties are actual. So when you're applying for a bid or for a contract between your entity and any other kind of professional corporation, government-related entity, and they do their quick audit, they make sure that you actually have the rights to sell what you're selling. Thank you.
Okay, there was another question. Could you put your hands up? I think I saw someone in the back line. Yes? Okay.
مرحبا لولو بكر Chrome Advisory. I think you've noticed my partner and I are very competitive. I can't allow him to ask a question without asking a follow-up. So my follow-up question is, you do a lot of vetting of assets, and I'd like to very much know what is your observation on the improvement of the quality of assets that you vet here in Saudi Arabia over the years, and what percentage of your portfolio is actually invested in Saudi assets? Thank you.
Vetting from a legal or just commercial?
Commercial.
Let me try to. So last year we've looked at 850 companies. 2012 we've looked at 100 companies. So that's been kind of the progression, right? 6% last year were from Saudi. It was about 1% in 2012. And that progression, twofold, our brand grew, we have more operations and presence in Saudi. But there is definitely an increase in quality and quantity in startups coming out of the kingdom. Now, having said that, how many companies that were originated out of the kingdom and we invested in, out of a portfolio of 15 companies, one. Which is, we have only one in Saudi, we have only one in Egypt, we have only one in Kuwait, and the rest are pretty much bil Imarat, or were originated bil Imarat. However, a lot of our companies kind of grew into Saudi. So two of our companies, their growth into Saudi was through acqui-hires and acquisitions. So they acquired a company with Saudi to pull them into their, to be their arm in the kingdom. So we have 3, let's say, that were originated and that we're directly associated with. I think the quality is improving. I think this is a blessing in disguise with what's happening in the oil industry, where it's pushing a lot of entrepreneurs who were previously dreaming to, or had a great job in some of the larger corporations and industries, to shift over and take that risk. So we're definitely seeing that, but still 1 out of 15, it's not a great number. We were hopefully, and we're doing a lot to try and improve that and grow that number, inshallah.
Can you comment on the size of tickets, the progression you see as well?
Yeah, they're definitely growing. I think the size of the tickets, I mean, if we're looking at Series A, in general in the region, Series A's have been growing from, 4 years ago, they were about $1 million or less. Now we're seeing Series A's in the region that are a minimum of 3 or an average of about 4. So we're seeing Series A's that are pushing up the so they've doubled, if not more, at least Series A, where we kind of do most of our investments. So it's definitely has been growing. It's a good thing, it's not a bad thing. Cost of living is going up. There is competition that's coming in, but also a lot of the companies are hiring. top tier talent today. So before you were, the standard model is me and my co-founder, we have a job and this is a part-time gig and we have a team in India or Philippines that do the tech in the back end and let's launch. Versus today where no, we're going to quit our jobs and jump to this and we're going to hire top tier university grads, PhDs, data scientists, whatever it takes and put together a proper company that has an actual chance of winning. So they require more money. So it's a good thing. Did I answer your question? Thank you.
Any more questions in the audience? So here's the one that we get a lot. You want entrepreneurs to have the hard discussion of what the cap table is going to look like. What should I get? I had the idea initially. What should I get? I got this deal. I got this. I did this. How do you facilitate these kinds of conversations? Or even for the investors in the audience who have to help mediate some of these discussions amongst founders, what kinds of rules of thumb do you follow to kind of arrive at the best possible conclusion that makes all parties happy?
So we have to facilitate, but we have to facilitate with an informed mind. So we spend time talking, and this originated by coincidence. So one of the companies we were looking at, 3 founders, they came to our office. One founder didn't have, 2 founders spoke really good English. One founder didn't speak good English. And my founders are Arab, but they're one of them doesn't speak Arabic in a good or excellent Arabic skills. During the pitch, he grabbed me aside and said, I don't think this guy should be the CEO. I think this guy should be the CEO. So we said, okay, well, let's dig into it. So we went, spent about a day with the entire team, 2 hours, interviewed every single person in the team, called up their previous employers and previous employees, and did a kind of a 360 on every single founder, understood who is truly respected by his peers, who has the leadership skills, who has the deep domain expertise, and who has the commitment. And it was the CEO as the CEO. So when we sat down with them later to facilitate the conversation of who owns what, vesting, who's the CEO, who gets the board seat, X, Y, Z, we definitely had an informed decision, an idea, this guy is the main guy. And there are a lot of companies there that do really well with 2 or 3 or 4 partners, but it's typically one guy. It's typically there's one person where if he's out, everything crumbles. Typically, I'm saying in 75, 80% of the time. So do your diligence, understand who is that person, and make sure that the interests are aligned and he has his interests aligned with the company. Make sure he doesn't have another job. Make sure that he gets most of the shares. Make sure that he vests his shares, and he gets the board seat if there is a board seat. So it's tough, but you gotta.
We have one question, first row.
The panel is asking most of the question.
Can you talk a little bit about your exits? Potential exits. Have you done any exits yet? And
Sure, Doctor. So we've exited one company. It was called Jado Pado. It was a marketplace that was stuck between the titans. Amazon acquired Souk. Noon was launching at the same time. These guys had 75 engineers. They didn't have the same amount of capital, but had a really strong back-end technology. So in a short period of time after Amazon acquired Souk, a week later, Noon acquired Jado Pado. So it was an acqui-hire. They hired them for their tech and their team, or acquired them for their tech and their team. We're not allowed to disclose the amount, but it was an acqui-hire. It wasn't a major outcome for everyone. We're in the process of going through another acquisition at the moment, but it's going to be an acqui-hire plus of some sort. So most of the exits in the region have been M&A. We haven't seen any IPOs. Within our portfolio, it's still a young portfolio, so we're either able to exit through secondaries or through acqui-hires at the moment. We think it's going to take us another 2 to 3 years till we start seeing exits within our portfolio. But there has definitely there's been some cases where that rule didn't stand. So carriage in Kuwait was, إذا ماني غلطان, 14-15 months. $3 million seeded exited at 114 or 15 months. So there's definitely unique circumstances. We definitely see the exits in the region are going to grow more and more as we see international companies coming in and M&A happening. And as we're seeing acqui-hires happening, these are going to build bigger businesses that are going to go for the IPO or the M&A over time. So we haven't exited any companies in Saudi yet. But my view is if you want a proper exit, you have to be regional. You have to have a bulk of 50 million users or consumers of some sort, and you want to increase your multiples. Don't just cover Saudi. Cover Saudi, Egypt, and the Emirat. Your multiple is going to grow extensively. And in that way, you'll build a proper exit. So that's kind of what we push companies towards, is try to have a regional strategy so you push up your exit multiples at the when it's time to celebrate.
Yusuf, thank you very much. It was brief, but it was informative. Please help me thank Yusuf for his time and insight.
Thank you very much.